kid. Vesper is the first hero you get in Kingdom Rush Alliance, but unlike all the previous first heroes, he isn't good nor bad, he's just mid. Some could say he's just budget Eridan, and honestly, I can get that. But still, Vesper has his place among all Alliance heroes, so let's get into it. First of all, we gotta mention Vesper's stats. 300 HP and 40% armor isn't honestly too bad. It's actually respectable enough that it warrants Vesper to have a duelist playstyle. However, the problem with that is that his rather abysmal health regeneration. He regenerates 21 HP per second, or nearly 15 seconds just to heal back to full, which is already pretty insane. But in practice, this is actually lower. If he's in range combat, depending on which range attack he's using, the idle regeneration takes twice or even thrice as long, which is pretty bad considering that I just said that he has some sort of dueling playstyle. Fortunately, Vesper is a Linearian hero, so he has the privilege of benefiting from the Blessing of Vitality upgrade, which does allow him to circumvent this problem pretty decently, and can sometimes allow him to stay in combat way longer than most heroes even. Vesper has a long range attack, and it's pretty bad. It deals 24 to 36 physical damage, which is on average 60% more damage than his regular attacks, but it takes twice as long, and here's the fun thing. This is arguably the worst basic attack in Alliance. 15 DPS. It is the second worst basic attack DPS, tying with Raylin and barely above Taurus, and it's even lower than Vesper's regular attacks, and it also has a tendency to whiff a lot. Basically, this thing sucks, both mathematically and practically, but I mean sure, it's an okay bonus to get a few hits early trading DPS for range, but still, it sucks a lot. Both of Vesper's range and melee attacks deal the same amount of damage, 15 to 23 physical damage, or 19 DPS, which is, in the grand scheme of things, kinda low. Sure, it's not the worst damage in the game, but 19 DPS is still on the rather lower side of the damage spectrum. Arrow to the Knee lets Vesper shoot a golden arrow that deals 90 physical damage and stuns the enemy hit for 1 second. This skill has a 10-second cooldown, and it cannot target bosses and mini-bosses, although it used to be able to. Vesper has a wind-up time to use the skill, which can be cancelled to reposition the skill better. Overall, Arrow to the Knee is just a decent utility skill for Vesper, especially used when high-tier enemies, but it can also clutch up leaking enemies due to its high range and nature of rarely missing, on top of the stun giving precious time. And also the damage might just finish the enemy off entirely. Ricochet is easily Vesper's #1 skill. From the bottom, Meat Potential skill. Vesper fires a bouncing arrow that can hit up to 8 enemies for a whopping 35 physical damage. Oh dear. You might say, hey, 280 damage in total doesn't sound too bad, to which I smack you in the head, hang you by the balls, and say, that is a lot of enemies to have in the first place, and even if you do manage to get 8 enemies hit, that 35 damage is so insignificant that you might as well use a pure AoE attack instead. And to add insult to injury, Ricochet also has a very long 20-second cooldown, and this skill cannot re-hit the same enemy. On the bright side, Ricochet needs 3 enemies to trigger, so that means it'll do at least 105 damage. But then again, spread damage, so nah. You can still have this skill upgraded because it doesn't really tamper with Vesper's gameplay too much, and it's still a bit more damage than his basic attack once in a while, but you know, trash versus garbage type of thing. Martial Flourish is a melee skill that makes Vesper do a 3-hit combo on an enemy, dealing 270 physical damage in total. This skill has a really nice 16-second cooldown and really carries Vesper's melee capabilities. It is easily his best skill. That burst damage, especially on that 16-second cooldown, can go a long way. Combined with Vesper's natural bulk and being a Linearian hero, he can take on important targets like spellcasters and spawners all by himself most of the time. The rather moderate cooldown means Vesper is able to cycle Martial Flourish constantly from enemy to enemy, or just doubling down on dueling. Martial Flourish is also one of the very few skills that benefits from merciless defense, so each Dark Army Tower increases the skill's potential ever so slightly. Overall, it's a great skill, and carries its entire kit potential. To help with his melee prowess even further, Vesper has Disengage. When below 40% health, Vesper will dodge the next single attack, and dash backwards, firing 3 arrows that deal 120 physical damage each. The targeting of the skill is actually weirder than I initially thought. So basically, when Vesper uses Disengage, he seems to have an area around the unit that triggered the skill and targets enemies randomly within that area. This means that he might not even able to shoot the main target at all, but the area is rather pretty small, so most of the time it's rather inconsequential. Disengage has a 20-second cooldown and does not work against area and range attacks, and cannot be used if Vesper's dash location is invalid, which is usually the exit. Disengage encourages Vesper to be more aggressive in melee, so that he can trigger the skill in the first place, and that burst damage is nothing to scoff at. You can always heal him back up with his hero spell, or use his range attacks instead if you're desperate to keep him in combat. Disengage can be somewhat campaign dependent, depending if the enemies in said campaign have enough damage to actually get him to the 40% threshold, or not being too infested with armor. Disengage has a history of being buggy, however, whether it was Vesper getting stuck in the paths of Starving Hollow or dashing back an unnatural amount of distance. Although, I don't know the exact causes of these bugs. Hell, I don't even know if they still exist or patched now. Vesper's hero spell is Aerostorm. It fires down 28 arrows on the path that each deal 35 true damage. The arrows will spread ahead along the path and momentarily slow down enemies by 50%. Most importantly, this skill can hit flying enemies. You don't come by area anti-air spells quite often. However, admittedly, this skill doesn't have the best damage. All the arrows won't hit the same enemy. But the point that I find with Aerostorm is its high AoE coverage, and the damage is good enough to at least heavily wear down most fodder enemies, especially flyers, which is quite the commodity for hero spells. Although Aerostorm won't usually outright kill everything on its own, that's fine. The generous AoE, anti-air support, and true damage still does absolute wonders for the defense. With his kit, you might think that Vesper is a hybrid melee range hero, just like Eridan. I mean, the similarities are right there, I get it, but hear me out. Vesper is more of a duelist hero with range options rather than a full-on hybrid. You wanna know why? His range kit is a bit worse than his melee kit in my opinion. His basic range attack is kinda low, it's mostly for cleanup or desperate anti-air. Arrow to the knee is decent for doing the two things mentioned earlier, and Ricochet just exists, I guess. Meanwhile, his melee attack has the same damage as his range attack. Even though it's terrible, you're not missing out on any DPS. Martial Flourish is a really nice damage skill compared to his other range abilities, and Ricochet. And Disengage is still pretty decent, and he has actual usable bulk on top of self-healing potential. Compared to Eridan, who has skills to incentivize both melee and range, Vesper's kit is a bit more leaning to the melee side. You should still cycle the cooldowns between his melee and range abilities though, it helps a lot. And don't get me wrong, going range is still fine, especially if you want to save Martial Flourish for a better target or you just want to have your hands a bit free, you know? It's fine. And Aerostorm is Aerostorm. It's just great against droughts, and unlike most spells, it can actually hit air as an AoE, and that's a plus. That said, Vesper has a glaring weakness. It's literally his lack of damage. His kit, despite being simple, has great potential, but it's just chained down by the numbers, which is, for the most part, below average. I can't elaborate any further, it's just a stat problem, and Ricochet. He also deals mostly physical damage other than Aerostorm, although arguably the two-hero system in Alliance does alleviate that a bit. Vesper is a certified mid-tier. His kit and stats are just enough, okay? He certainly could be better than he currently is, but you could still make good use of him with what he currently has. He won't outright kill anything, but he can help a lot with the defense, soften up all the enemies enough that it brings actual meaningful value. For free-to-play heroes, he can do absolute wonders with his generalized kit, even more than Grim said in more cases than you think. For the entire roster, it's rare to get a duelist with an area anti-air skill at the same time, and you can pick him up as a generalist support at that point. Vesper is just okay. Could be better, but definitely not unusable.